2 minutes into the hearing, Pam Bondi leaned back, smirked, then dropped 8 words like a grenade. "Did you learn law at a post office like your mother?" The chamber went silent. Cameras froze. Jasmine Crockett didn't even breathe. She calmly reached into her folder and pulled out one old creased photograph. What was in that faded image that turned public shame into national reckoning? The red tally light blinked on a sharp, steady unblinking. C-SPAN was live. Every seat in the oversight chamber was taken, every microphone tuned, every camera already watching. It wasn't just another ethics hearing, it was political theater with live ammo, and everyone knew it. Jasmine Crockett stepped into the room like she belonged there because she did. Her navy blue suit caught the fluorescent light like steel-polished armor, and around her neck hung something far more personal, a simple gold locket that once rode through 30 years of Texas heat on her mother's postal route. She didn't glance at the crowd. She didn't need to. She already knew half the country was waiting for her to slip, and the other half was praying she wouldn't. Across the table, Pam Bondi reclined in her leather-backed chair, sipping black coffee with the composure of a woman who'd already rehearsed her attack lines. Her blonde hair was perfectly set, her expression sunny too sunny. She waved briefly to one of the press photographers, then turned her attention to Jasmine with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. As Jasmine began her opening statement, measured, focused, precise, Bondi tilted her head, and then it happened. The eye roll, subtle but unmistakable. That slow, deliberate dismissal women like Jasmine had seen their whole lives. Smirking, Bondi whispered something to the aide beside her and stifled a laugh behind her hand. The room felt colder, tighter, the kind of silence that tastes like metal. What was so funny about Jasmine's story that Pam Bondi couldn't stop smirking? Jasmine didn't waste time. Barely 30 seconds into her questioning, she went for the fault line. "Attorney General Bondi," she said, voice calm but cutting, "why did your office block the release of the unredacted Epstein client list after vowing transparency under oath?" The room tightened again. Cameras shifted. Even the Republican aides looked up from their phones. Bondi set her coffee down with a deliberate clink. Her smile didn't fade, it sharpened. "Congresswoman," she interrupted, her voice syrup-thick with condescension, "where did you even study law?" "Some backroom at the USPS. The words fell like a slap across marble. And then nothing. No coughs, no movement. Even the air in the chamber seemed to recoil. For one long moment, Jasmine didn't move. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't fire back. She just stared through Bondi, through the room, through every insult she'd swallowed in law school and courtrooms in Congress. She knew what this was. It wasn't just about credentials. It wasn't even about the Epstein files. It was about erasure, about shaming the very roots she stood on. Behind her, a CNN reporter's pen stopped mid-sentence. On the monitors, the C-SPAN audio levels jumped, then flatlined into dead silence. Jasmine's hands rested on the table steady. Her breath was slow, but her eyes didn't blink. Because this wasn't just about a degree. It was about the woman who carried mail through rainstorms and red lines so her daughter could carry justice into rooms like this. What do you do when someone tries to humiliate not just your career, but your mother's legacy? Jasmine didn't reach for her notes. She didn't clear her throat or ask for time. Instead, with hands as steady as stone, she slid something across the lacquered desk, slow, deliberate, the way you reveal a weapon you've carried too long in silence. A photo edges curled, creased down the center like it had lived in a wallet for years. The camera zoomed in. A black woman in a faded USPS uniform stood under the Texas Sun mailbag over one shoulder, sweat on her brow, and a tired but unshakable smile on her face. Jasmine looked down at it, then up straight at Bondi through the fluorescent glare and fake politeness. Her voice didn't rise. It dropped. Lower. Heavier. Like truth with gravity. "That woman," she said, her fingertip pressing gently on the photograph, worked nights. In heat. In rain. In neighborhoods where no one would open the door to her, but she still delivered. A shift rippled through the room. One chair creaked. A reporter's breath caught on mic. Even Representative Jamie Raskin, who'd seen more hearings than most men see sunrises, lowered his head and nodded once, slow, deliberate, like a verdict. Jasmine continued, eyes unblinking, words sharp but reverent. She raised 2 kids, on one income. No complaints, no shortcuts. She didn't go to Harvard, but she taught me everything I needed to survive rooms like this. Pam Bondi didn't smile now. The smirk was gone. Her eyes flicked to the photo, then away. Jasmine's hand remained on the image, not to show it off, but to protect it. But what was she about to say that no one in that room could forget? She carried more than envelopes, more than bills, more than birthday cards that never arrived on time. Linda Mae Crockett carried the weight of a country that rarely saw her, but always expected her to show up. Rain, sun, stray dogs, broken sidewalks, none of it stopped her. At 5 a.m., she was sorting routes. By 6, she was out the door. By night, she was home in her government-issued boots, peeling off her uniform with aching feet and a quiet sigh that never asked for applause. In their 2-bedroom duplex off Marburg Street, Jasmine did her homework beneath a wall of route maps. Zip codes were wallpaper. Ink stains from her mother's hands sometimes smudged her textbooks. She'd fall asleep to the sound of envelopes being shuffled, rubber bands snapping, and tired whispers that said, "Just a little further, baby, we almost there." That rhythm, that grind, it wasn't just routine, it was gospel. Linda didn't complain. She didn't demand respect. But every torn glove and swollen ankle was a silent demand for justice. She watched white-collar men park Lexus sedans in gated neighborhoods, while she dropped foreclosure letters at doors with no lights on. Still she walked. Still she smiled. And Jasmine remembered every step, every bruise, every moment her mother was invisible to the very system she helped hold together. Jasmine's voice, now layered in memory and fire, echoed back into the hearing. My mother didn't carry just mail. She carried the weight of a system that ignored her. So how did the law forget people like her? Jasmine reached under the stack of printed briefs and pulled out a thin white envelope. No labels, no stamps, just a quiet, dangerous weight. She opened it slowly, carefully, like peeling back the skin of a lie. Inside, an internal DOJ memo, never before released, its pages redacted in thick black bars, names, dates, connections, all scrubbed clean. At the top corner in small print, the initials PB. The room leaned forward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her silence already said more than Bondi's entire testimony. Then, without a word, she placed a second paper beside it, a payroll stub, faded and folded. 2,6 to 42, final payment. 28 years of federal service reduced to 4 digits on cheap paper. Her hand rested on the slip, and her voice, tight with fire and restraint, cut through the hush. That's what service looks like. Not sealing files for billionaires. Not hiding names because they donated to the right campaigns. She didn't look at Bondi. She looked at the cameras. At the people watching from postal hubs and kitchen tables. My mother didn't have redaction power. She didn't have country clubs or lawyers. She had 2 knees in one route. Pam Bondi shifted in her chair, crossed her legs, uncrossed them. The coffee cup didn't reach her lips this time. The memo on the table glared back at her like a ghost in black ink. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She brought evidence the DOJ couldn't hide. Pam Bondi's fingers tapped the table once, twice, then stopped. Her eyes flicked to the memo Jasmine had laid bare. And for the first time that morning, the practiced smile faltered. Her counsel leaned in, whispering fast, urgent, like someone trying to plug a leak with a paper napkin. Jasmine didn't blink. She turned the page slow and steady, as if time itself had surrendered to her pace. Her voice sliced through the air like cold steel. Statement from DOJ Prosecutor Alan Reyes. We were told to drop the Epstein follow-up or find new jobs. They wanted silence. We chose integrity, and they fired us for it. She turned another page. From Maria Liao. I wasn't dismissed for misconduct. I was dismissed for asking why some names stayed buried. No one in the room moved. The silence wasn't passive, it was paralyzed. Then Jasmine raised her head, not to the panel, not to the press, but to Bondi. Her words were fire wrapped in velvet. Did you laugh at them too, Attorney General? Or is your disdain only reserved for women who deliver mail and daughters who dare to speak? Bondi didn't respond. She couldn't. Her jaw tensed. Her hands retreated beneath the table. C-SPAN zoomed in tight on her face, her throat's stiff eyes no longer defiant but calculating. Jasmine said nothing more. She didn't have to. The room had already shifted. And then Bondi made a fatal mistake. Pam Bondi straightened in her seat, brushing invisible lint from her blazer like she was dusting off the weight of every accusation. Her voice rang out sharp and cold. I don't apologize for having a real education and real credentials, Congresswoman. The insult didn't come wrapped in sarcasm this time. It was direct, raw, and laced with venom. Gasps rippled through the chamber like a drop match in dry grass. Jasmine didn't look shocked. She looked like steel being tempered. Her jaw locked. Her hands stayed perfectly still, except for the slow curl of her fingers into fists on the desk. She didn't rise. She didn't shout. She sat in it, let the sting hang in the air. Let everyone feel what it meant to be told your bloodline wasn't worthy of the table. Outside the chamber, Twitter ignited. The first tweet came from a Hill reporter. Did Pam Bondi really just mock a postal worker's daughter on live TV? Hashtags detonated USPS Pride Crockett. Clapback Linda May did more. In barbershops, kitchens, union halls across America, the moment was replayed on cracked phone screens and smart TVs. Jasmine's silence was louder than Bondi's arrogance. But inside that hearing room, the air was about to shift. Jasmine inhaled slowly. Her eyes locked forward, not at Bondi, but at something beyond her. Because what Jasmine did next would be replayed millions of times before midnight. Jasmine reached down and pulled something wrapped in cloth from beneath her notes. The room held its breath as she unwrapped it, slow, deliberate, and revealed a small wooden frame worn at the corners, the glass faintly cracked. Inside was a handwritten letter in blue ink, delicate and slightly faded the loops of the script, unmistakably from another time. She didn't explain it. She simply stepped forward and placed it on the committee desk like an offering to history. Her voice dropped lower than before, stripped of defense, stripped of politics. This was the last note my mother wrote me before she passed. Jasmine said, eyes locked on the text. She didn't leave behind stock portfolios or sealed endorsements. Just this. She looked at the panel, then began to read. I carried letters for 30 years, in storms and sun and silence. Now you carry your people. Don't let them break you. The words fell like scripture. No one moved. Not the stenographer, not the press, not even the opposition. It wasn't just a letter, it was a baton passed from one invisible woman to another. Jasmine's voice caught just for a moment, but she didn't stop. She let the ache live inside the words. Across the aisle, Pam Bondi shifted. Her hands twitched, then reached not for a rebuttal, not for her notes, but for her water glass. Her smirk was gone. Her poise cracked like the letter's glass frame. But why was Pam Bondi suddenly reaching for her water glass? Pam Bondi cleared her throat, forced a brittle smile, and leaned back toward the mic. With respect, she said tightly, this hearing is about the rule of law, not personal narratives or emotional manipulation. The words rang hollow like a gavel dropped in an empty courtroom. She tried to pivot, statutes, protocols, procedural jargon, but the air had already shifted. The room no longer belonged to her. Representative Jamie Raskin leaned forward, voice firm. Actually, this hearing is about ethical failures, and silencing whistleblowers is personal. AOC followed without hesitation. Congresswoman Crockett is doing what too many women before her were punished for telling the truth out loud. The chairwoman didn't blink. Ms. Crockett, you're granted an additional 5 minutes. The clack of her gavel didn't restore order, it validated Jasmine. Outside the chamber, the digital storm surged. CNN ran a chyron in bold red, Bondi mocks, postal worker, Mom Crockett responds with letter. On Twitter, Jasmine's name trended worldwide. In union halls and family rooms, in post offices and lunch breaks, Americans weren't just watching, they were choosing sides. And many chose her. Inside, Jasmine remained seated, but the weight of the room leaned in her direction now. Even those who once rolled their eyes at her name began to listen, with their hands no longer folded. Pam Bondi, flanked by titles and talking points, looked suddenly small. This wasn't just a policy debate anymore. It was something heavier, something older. Was this still a hearing or a reckoning? Jasmine didn't rush. She reached into her folder, unsealed a thick manila envelope, and laid it flat on the table with both hands like a dealer laying down a final card. The seal was fresh, the stamp at the top, unmistakable FOIA release. Office of Legal Counsel. The tension in the room snapped taut again. Bondi's smile vanished like a shadow in floodlight. This Jasmine said voice, low and controlled, was released under court order 3 days ago. Internal communications between the Attorney General's office and an outside political entity. She slid out the first page and read the subject line aloud. Use race deflection, re-Crockett. A ripple of gasps cut through the chamber. Cameras repositioned. Chairs shifted. Bondi's aide dropped his pen. Jasmine continued page after page emails laced with strategy. Talking points designed to frame her as overly emotional, angry, playing the victim card. Another memo used the phrase, accentuate Ivy League contrast. And then she paused, finger pressed against a single highlighted line. Consider referencing her mother's career use, puppet, if needed to diminish. She looked up slowly, her eyes steady flames. Puppet, she repeated, not as a question, but as a condemnation. That's what you called a federal worker who walked 13 miles a day for 30 years to keep this country running? Bondi didn't speak. Her face was stone, but her hand gripped the edge of her chair a little too tight. Why was the word puppet used in reference to her mother, Jasmine, leaned toward the mic, her tone calm but electric? Madam Chair, I request the committee recognize a witness, Mr. Alan Webb, former ethics advisor at the Department of Justice. A rustle moved through the chamber as a man in a plain gray suit rose from the back row. His gait was steady, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who knew too much for too long. He took his seat beside Jasmine, placed one hand on the table and nodded. Under oath, his voice didn't shake. I was removed from my role after flagging repeated interference from AG Bondi's office. My emails were blocked, my internal memos deleted. I was told directly, back off unless you want your clearance reviewed. He glanced at Bondi, who stared back in silence. She shut down 2 ongoing investigations, both involving politically connected men with links to Epstein. The chamber exploded. Gasps, shouts. The chairwoman slammed her gavel, demanding order. Cameras snapped into overdrive. Outside, breaking news banners blazed red. DOJ whistleblower confirms bias at the top. Bondi's legal team huddled. Her face had gone pale, not with surprise, but with calculation. She knew this might come. She just hadn't expected it to land so clean. Jasmine didn't react. She stayed still, composed, letting the chaos churn around her like water around rock. And then she glanced down at the folder she hadn't opened yet, the one marked personal, because Jasmine still hadn't revealed the one thing America didn't expect. Jasmine reached into her bag, not for a document, not for another email, but for something far more dangerous. Small scratch wrapped in a soft cloth, like a relic, her mother's old flip phone. She held it in her palm for a moment, thumb hovering over the keypad. No theatrics, just gravity. Then she pressed play and set it down on the table beside the microphone. The voice that crackled through the speakers was older, worn, and warm like sunlight through a dusty window. Baby girl, don't let anyone ever make you feel less. You hear me? Not because of where I worked, not because of what we didn't have. You are enough. You've always been. Her voice cracked just once as the recording ended, not because she was weak, but because something inside her mother's words still lived under her skin. The room had heard countless testimonies over the years, pleas, arguments, lies dressed as facts. But this was something different. This was a ghost made real. This was truth they couldn't strike from the record. No one moved. The panel sat frozen. The press didn't dare touch their shutters. And across the aisle, Bondi looked down, lips pressed so tight they almost disappeared. This wasn't a point in a debate. It was a wound turned outward. Jasmine breathed, steadying herself. Her mother had delivered more than letters. She had delivered armor. But how do you fight back when the insult is aimed at your soul? The silence after the voicemail still hung in the air, thick as storm clouds. Jasmine leaned into her mic voice, steady but sharpened like a blade drawn slow. Reclaiming my time, she said, her eyes never leaving Bondi's. They say power corrupts, but some of y'all were corrupted long before you had it. The words didn't explode. They sank cold and precise, slicing through the room like a scalpel. Bondi didn't answer. Couldn't. Her posture stiffened. The blush on her cheeks wasn't shame, it was exposure. Her smirk vanished. Her fingers tightened around the pen like it was the last thing she could still control. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The ground was shifting beneath them, and everyone could feel it. The power Bondi once wielded with condescension now trembled under the weight of lived truth. Every carefully prepared talking point, every media-friendly quote, it all sounded thin, now hollow, next to a daughter's defiance and a mother's ghost. Behind the dais, staffers whispered. Members glanced at one another, suddenly unsure which way the tide would turn. Bondi had come here armored in title and status and party protection. But all of that was peeling away under a single spotlight, and there was nowhere left to hide. She came to dominate a hearing, but now the hearing was dominating her. Jasmine didn't pause to gloat. She moved with precision like a surgeon on a clock. One file, then another, then the third laid out on the desk like blades. "Let the record reflect," she said. 3 documents each deadlier than the last. First, $472,000 in PAC money right before the Epstein list was sealed. Second, DOJ logs, Bondi redacted 23 names without legal review. Third, Jasmine held up a printed email. Crockett is the loud problem used professionalism as contrast. Translation: silence her by pretending you're better. Bondi didn't respond. Her face tightened, trapped between fury and fear. The chamber leaned in breath, held. Jasmine looked across the room, not just at Bondi, but at every person who'd ever rolled their eyes at a black woman for being too passionate, too direct, too loud to be heard. "You don't fear my words," she said. "You fear what they reveal." Jasmine didn't hesitate. She pulled the final document from her folder and placed it squarely on the desk. "Madam Chair," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs, "I move that this committee issue a formal directive requiring Attorney General Pam Bondi to submit the full, unredacted Epstein file, including internal communications and name logs within 30 calendar days. No wavering, no drama, just law made surgical." The room snapped to attention. The chairwoman glanced left, then right, nods from Raskin, from AOC, from others, whose silence now turned into consensus. "Motion received," the chairwoman declared, and approved. The gavel cracked like a rifle shot. Bondi didn't move, but the flush rising up her neck said everything. Her jaw tightened and one hand gripped her chair, like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Every lens in the room refocused. Reporters' fingers flew across keyboards. On screen, the C-SPAN light blinked once, then held steady, fixed on Bondi's face as the walls she built began to close in. She adjusted her blazer, but her fingers trembled. Whatever confidence she walked in with was now hanging by a thread, one public deadline away from collapse. Jasmine sat back composed but alert, knowing the hardest part wasn't what she exposed, it was what came next. Because this wasn't just about transparency, it was about legacy. And for Bondi, it was about survival. But would she comply or burn everything to hide what she'd done? Screens flickered in break rooms across America, post offices in Detroit, Dallas, Philly, and Flint. Somewhere between sorting bins and time cards, workers stopped what they were doing and turned toward the TVs. Jasmine Crockett's voice echoed over clinking coffee mugs and the whir of conveyor belts. Her words about her mother weren't just personal, they were familiar. They sounded like home. In a cramped mailroom in South Philadelphia, a woman in a Navy uniform pressed her hand over her chest. Her name tag read, Esther. Tears welled in her eyes as she watched Jasmine hold up that photograph, the same kind of uniform, the same kind of hands. "She defended all of us today," Esther whispered. "All the ones who were never seen unless something went missing." Across the country, union halls buzzed. Postal veterans shared clips on Facebook. Daughters texted their mothers. Former carriers posted photos with the caption, "My route, my sacrifice, my pride." In homes lined with framed awards and broken backs, something stirred, not just pride, but recognition. Someone had finally said it out loud that blue-collar work wasn't beneath dignity. It was dignity. The hearing had started as politics, but somewhere between the insult and the silence, it had become something deeper. A mirror, a reckoning, a love letter written in federal ink. When did honesty become so radical? The press podium sat empty. Cameras waited. Microphones stood live. but Pam Bondi never showed. Minutes before the scheduled briefing, her office sent a two-line statement, postponed due to scheduling conflicts. Behind the scenes, DOJ officials scrambled phone lines, lit up aides whispered in corners, and damage control memos flew faster than answers. The words containment strategy were heard more than justice. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett stepped out of the chamber without a word. No smile, no fist in the air, just quiet poise and a glint in her eyes that said everything the headlines couldn't. She didn't walk like someone who'd won. She walked like someone who no longer needed to prove she belonged. Not in that room, not to them, not anymore. As reporters swarmed the marble steps behind her, she paused beneath the shadow of the Capitol dome. One camera zoomed in close, hoping for a reaction, a soundbite, a moment of fire. But Jasmine didn't perform. She exhaled long and full, then turned her gaze to the horizon, where the light hit her locket, just enough to catch the lens. Inside the building, Bondi's team was still rewriting press statements. Outside, America was already rewriting what power looked like. Jasmine had walked in carrying her mother's name like a weight. She walked out carrying it like a crown. Was this how power was supposed to look? The sky over Dallas was gray that morning, not heavy, just hushed like it knew something sacred was about to happen. Jasmine Crockett stood outside the old postal station, where her mother had clocked in for nearly 3 decades. The paint on the building had faded. The drop boxes were rusted at the corners. But to Jasmine, it was a cathedral. She stepped forward, bent slightly, and placed a single white rose at the foot of the front steps, right where her mother used to tie her laces before walking into the heat. No press followed her here. No microphones. Just a quiet cameraman in a long, reverent frame. The lens panned slowly, capturing the rows of weathered mailboxes that lined the block, each one a little crooked, a little dented, but still standing. Like soldiers without medals, like monuments without marble. Her voice came soft over the image, not as a speech, but a memory folded into truth. This country wasn't built by the powerful. It was held together by the unnoticed. The ones who kept walking, kept delivering, even when no one said thank you. She looked up at the flag above the station, slightly torn, still waving. Jasmine didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just stood there, grounded in something deeper than applause. Legacy didn't live in headlines, it lived here. In footsteps and calluses. In roots remembered only by heart. What part of this story spoke to you most? The vote passed, with a standing majority, bipartisan, swift and thunderous. For once, Congress didn't argue. They honored. The motion was clear to rename the South Dallas Federal Postal Facility after Linda May Crockett. Not a lobbyist, not a donor, a mail carrier, a mother, a woman whose name had never graced a headline until her daughter made the whole country remember it. Jasmine stood at the unveiling, surrounded by postal workers in full uniform and families clutching yellowed pay stubs like medals. A velvet cloth hung over the bronze plaque. When the curtain dropped, there it was etched in bold serif letters against polished stone, Linda May Crockett Federal Postal Building. The crowd didn't erupt. They stood in a hush, the kind of silence that only respect can command. Just then, a man in his 60s wearing a faded USPS cap stepped forward, holding a worn envelope. "I don't mean to interrupt," he said, voice trembling, "but I've been waiting 20 years to give this back." Jasmine took it gently. Inside was a folded note dated 2003, addressed to him during a custody battle. A letter of support signed by Linda May Crockett. She'd vouched for him when no one else would, helped him keep his kids. His eyes welled. "Your mama didn't just deliver mail, she delivered mercy." The crowd exhaled, some quietly wiped their cheeks. Jasmine blinked hard, then smiled soft, full proud. The past wasn't just honored today. It stood up, walked forward, and thanked her back. Her fingers brushed the edge of the plaque, tracing her mother's name, like it was a path she'd walked her whole life. There were no speeches left to give, no words to top what had already been carved in the steel in memory. Behind her, soft music played a string arrangement, slow and reverent. And Jasmine, eyes shining but steady, didn't look at the cameras. She looked at the sky. She knew her mother wasn't just honored. She was heard. The woman who delivered letters now delivers justice. The auditorium buzzed with restless energy caps, half-cocked gowns, rustling camera flashes, blinking like fireflies. Jasmine Crockett stood at the podium in front of 300 graduating seniors, her heels planted firm, her gaze sweeping across a sea of young faces about to step into a world that still measured worth by pedigree. She didn't bring a script. She didn't need one. "They will laugh at you," she said, her voice calm but flint-edged. "They'll mock your zip code, your accent, your parents' job titles. Mine did all three." A beat of silence. Then she leaned forward, words sharp and deliberate. "Never let them laugh at where you came from. Let them fear where you're going." The students stilled. Teachers leaned in. Somewhere in the front row, a girl clutched her diploma like it was both sword and shield. Jasmine smiled, not soft, but certain. "My mother carried letters. I carry laws. And one day, one of you will carry more than both of us ever dreamed." Applause swelled, not loud, but rooted. The kind that didn't fade quickly. Jasmine stepped back from the mic, eyes fixed not on the crowd, but on a framed photo in her hand, her mother in uniform still smiling. What would your mother be proud of you for today? Whether you were a mail carrier, a factory worker, a nurse, or a teacher, your worth was never in the title, but in the quiet dedication you gave each day without applause. Some legacies don't need a spotlight to matter. They live on through the courage of those who carry them forward. Share this story if you believe truth, dignity, and a parent's love deserve to be heard. Who taught you your worth, and how will you honor them today? If this story struck something deep, don't let it fade into the scroll. Like, share, and subscribe to Hill Insights, where voices like Jasmine's rise in dignity gets the last word. Hit the bell, because the next name they try to silence might be yours. What part of this story reminded you of someone you love? Tell us in the comments. Your story matters just as much. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching. This wasn't just Jasmine's fight, it was her mother's voice finally heard. The truth didn't end in that hearing room. It's still walking routes, sorting mail, raising daughters who won't back down. Will you be the one to keep that legacy alive?